Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start off the second day of the 12 days of Christmas with some lighter fare. But I think you'll enjoy these poems written many years ago by Hilaire Belloc and T.S. Eliot. Belloc's cautionary tales for children, and let me show you here what this book looks like. Cautionary Tales for Children are satirical commentaries. They're actually written for adults, you might say, and based on the dull and boring literature often provided for kids at the end of the Victorian era. I believe Belloc was also making fun of the frightening children's books then popular in Germany, in which a mad tailor known as a Struwwelpeter jumped out of closets with a huge pair of scissors, threatening to cut off noses, fingers, and ears of misbehaving children. Awful, but just the thing for getting people to follow the orders of Hitler, perhaps? I had a hard time deciding whether to read the poem in Hilaire Belloc entitled Jim, who ran away from nurse and was eaten by a lion, or Matilda, who told lies and was burned to death. Due to my advanced age, perhaps I decided ladies first, and so I'll read the Matilda poem. Incidentally, this book of poems has pictures in it, cartoons by a very well-known British artist at the time, whose name was Basil Blackwood. Here's an introductory page that has a cartoon including the lion going for poor Jim, who had run away from his nurse. But anyway, we're going to read a slightly less bloody poem, only slightly, called Matilda, who told lies and was burned to death. Matilda told such dreadful lies, it made one gasp and stretch one's eyes. Her aunt, who from her earliest youth had kept a strict regard for truth, tried to believe Matilda. The effort very nearly killed her. And there is Matilda and the aunt. And would have done so had not she discovered this infirmity. For once, towards the close of day, Matilda, growing tired of play and finding she was left alone, went tiptoe to the telephone and summoned the immediate aid of London's noble fire brigade. Within an hour the gallant band were pouring in on every hand from Putney, Hackney Downs, and Bow. With courage high and hearts aglow, they galloped, roaring through the town. Matilda's house is burning down. Inspired by British cheers and loud proceeding from the frenzied crowd, they ran their ladders through a score of windows on the ballroom floor and took peculiar pains to souse the pictures up and down the house, until Matilda's aunt succeeded in showing them they were not needed. And even then she had to pay to get the men to go away. It happened that a few weeks later her aunt was off to the theater to see that interesting play, The Second Mrs. Tanqueray. She had refused to take her niece to hear this entertaining piece, a deprivation just and wise, to punish her for telling lies. That night, a fire did break out. You should have heard Matilda shout. You should have heard her scream and bawl and throw the windows up and call the people passing in the street, the rapidly increasing heat encouraging her to obtain their confidence, but all in vain. For every time she shouted, "Fire!" they only answered, "Little liar." And therefore, when her aunt returned, Matilda and the house were burned. The reality is that this is satirical, but children do love to hear these things, especially between the ages of 8 or so and 13. They kind of get on board with it, and they understand that it's meant to be funny and not to be taken seriously. It's not a true history of Matilda. And my grandchildren loved these stories. And we went through the whole book of cautionary tales with them. So I think that's great stuff, and it is fun to read. And as I said, kids really do enjoy it. So if you haven't ever read this short book and looked at the wonderful cartoons, you need to pick it up from the library, or you can buy it online, I know, and it could even be that a stray copy is in your favorite bookstore. Now, for entertaining, light poetry for the Christmas season or any other season, there's always T.S. Eliot and his Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. Here's a copy of it, which is currently available, and it has drawings in it by Edward Gorey, who, if possible, is an even better cartoonist than the one that Hilaire Belloc had. As most of you know, this book served as both the inspiration and the script for the London and New York Broadway musical hit Cats. I wouldn't be surprised if we could go to theaters that Cats would still be on the Broadway menu, or at least on an off-Broadway presentation. Marcia and I saw the London version of Cats in London back in the early 90s, and it was unforgettable. The costumes were magnificent, and the actors and actresses, all of whom were had very good dancing skills, danced up and down the aisles while they were singing some of the tunes. And one thing that show brought home to me is that many times poetry is improved if read with music. And I've done that in readings that I've carried out in the past for the Shawnee County Medical Society as a part of their annual fundraising musicale and poetry reading session. I'm going to read 2 poems from Cats. And most of you would have heard both of these at one time or another, I suspect, but they're so much fun. The first one is called Bustopher Jones, the Cat About Town. And here's a picture of Bustopher Jones sitting at a London club, in theory, getting ready to have his food delivered. Anyway, here we go. Bustopher Jones is not skin and bones. In fact, he's remarkably fat. He doesn't haunt pubs. He has 8 or 9 clubs. For he's the St. James's Street cat. He's the cat we all greet as he walks down the street in his coat of fastidious black. No commonplace mousers have such well-cut trousers or such an impeccable back. In the whole of St. James's, the smartest of names is the name of this Brummel of cats, and we're all of us proud to be nodded or bowed to by Bustopher Jones in white spats. His visits are occasional to the senior educational, and it is against the rules for any one cat to belong both to that and the joint superior schools. For a similar reason, when game is in season, he is found not at foxes, but blimps. But he's frequently seen at the gay stage and screen, which is famous for winkles and shrimps. In the season of venison, he gives his benison to the pot hunter's succulent bones. And just before noon's not a moment too soon to drop in for a drink at the drones. When he's seen in a hurry, there's probably curry at the Siamese or at the Glutton. If he looks full of gloom, then he's lunched at the Tomb on cabbage, rice pudding, and mutton. So much in this way passes Bustopher's day. At one club or another he's found. It can cause no surprise that under our eyes he has grown unmistakably round. He's a 25-pounder, or I'm a bounder. And he's putting on weight every day, but he's so well preserved because he's observed all his lifetime a routine, so he'll say, and to put it in rhyme, I shall last out my time, in the word of the stoutest of cats. It must and it shall be spring in Pall Mall, while Bustopher Jones wears white spats. And there he is, in his white spats. I think that's a marvelous comic poem. And I'm going to finish our session about cats with the poem called The Addressing of Cats. And Eliot has put a little line between the AD and the dressing. Addressing of cats. You can make of that what you will, but here's a picture of a cat on a pedestal, and you'll notice the gentleman is lifting his hat to the cat. We'll come to that in a minute. You've read of several kinds of cat. And my opinion now is that you should need no interpreter to understand their character. You now have learned enough to see that cats are much like you and me and other people whom we find possessed of various types of mind. For some are sane and some are mad, and some are good and some are bad, and some are better, some are worse, but all may be described in verse. You've seen them both at work in games and learnt about their proper names, their habits, and their habitat. But how would you address a cat? So first your memory I'll jog and say, a cat is not a dog. Now dogs pretend they like to fight. They often bark, more seldom bite. But yet a dog is, on the whole, what you would call a simple soul. Of course, I'm not including peaks and such fantastic canine freaks. The usual dog about the town is much inclined to play the clown, and far from showing too much pride, is frequently undignified. He's very easily taken in. Just chuck him underneath the chin, or slap him on the back, or shake his paw, and he will gambol and guffaw. He's such an easy-going lout, he'll answer any hail or shout. Again, I must remind you that a dog's a dog, a cat's a cat. With cats, some say one rule is true. Don't speak till you are spoken to. Myself, I do not hold with that. I say you should address a cat, but always keep in mind that he resents familiarity. I bow, and taking off my hat, address him in this form. O cat, O cat. But if he's the cat next door, whom I have often met before he comes to see me in my flat, I greet him with an "Oopsa, cat!" I've heard them call him James Buzz James, but we've not got so far as names. Before a cat will condescend to treat you as a trusted friend, some little token of esteem is needed, like a dish of cream, and you might now and then supply some caviar or Strasbourg pie, some potted grouse or salmon paste. He's sure to have his personal taste. I know a cat who makes a habit of eating nothing else but rabbit, and when he's finished, licks his paws so as not to waste the onion sauce. A cat's entitled to expect these evidences of respect. And so in time, you reach your aim and finally call him by his name. So this is this, and that is that. And there's how you address a cat. Well, I think that's great stuff. And T.S. Eliot, of course, wrote a huge amount of very serious and scholarly poetry, but nothing that has stood the time like the poems of the practical book of cats. So that's it for today. If you can stay alive for another week, we'll have more, and we hope you'll like it as well. Christmas has 10 days, so let's hope that all of the rest of them are a little better than the rest of the year we've just had. Blessings, and stay well. Goodbye.